Following the Israeli war on Gaza, the inauguration of President Obama, and the Israeli elections, I wanted some perspective on the status of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I thought that Professor Noam Chomsky would be an ideal candidate. But before I share that conversation with you, I'd like to thank Denis Kossayem from the Département de Philosophie Collège André Laurendeau for helping me to prepare for this interview. Yes, good morning. Is this Professor Chomsky?
Yeah, speaking.
Firstly, thank you very much for accepting to do this interview.
No, glad to do it.
Do you think that the 29 votes by Livni's Kadima party in the last election were favorably influenced by the war on Gaza? And if so, what does this say about the mood of the Israeli public opinion?
I think Kadima received some more votes than it otherwise would have because the small parties of the left, many of them drained into Kadima just to try to stop Netanyahu and Lieberman, even if they didn't agree. But the basic nature of the election is quite unmistakable. I mean, it's a significant shift towards the jingoist right. And yes, it was influenced by Gaza. The invasion of Gaza, the attack on Gaza, was overwhelmingly supported by Jewish Israelis, maybe 95%. And much of the criticism of it was that it didn't go far enough. They should have totally wiped out the beasts, not just devastated the region. So it's a very significant shift to the right. Avigdor Lieberman, who was regarded as virtually a neo-Nazi not long ago, is now becoming a centrist. In fact, even the New York Times describes his positions in an interesting way as some of his positions as acceptable to the left. It's quite interesting, and in fact, one should keep an eye on it. The Ethan Brunner, the New York Times correspondent, wrote that Lieberman's proposal to yield some land, yield Israeli land to the Palestinians, is a forthcoming proposal that's, that the left would accept, the peace movement. What he didn't bother to tell you is that the yielding the land means is a position that was denounced as viciously racist when it was first proposed, but is now moving to the mainstream. Namely, the idea, his proposal to take areas of heavy Arab population concentration in the Wadi Ara, where al-Fahim is, inside Israel, and simply force the people into some kind of derisory Palestinian entity. Of course, you don't ask them. They're all opposed. I mean, that really is an ugly racist proposal, but now it's being described as yielding land to be in a way acceptable to the left. That's a sign of how, apart from the deceit, it's a sign of how the ultra-right jingoist positions are moving toward the center and even being favorably described in the United States.
Well, I mean, one wonders about the motive then for attacking Hamas. Certainly, it wouldn't be to suppress the rocket fire. In the second question that I posed, it was regarding a piece by Norman Finkelstein, who suggests that actually the war was waged because Hamas had given some signs of wanting to negotiate.
Yeah, in fact, they've given very strong signs. Everything you read in the United States, and I suppose in Canada, describes Hamas as Hamas, the group that is dedicated to the destruction of Israel. This morning's newspapers repeat it. What you don't read is Hamas, the group that has long called for a two-state settlement, which the United States and Israel reject. So yes, that's surely part of the reason. I mean, there's a long tradition. In fact, Finkelstein discusses it in the piece you mentioned of Israel acting to try to undercut the threat of negotiations and diplomatic settlement. The most extreme example of that was their invasion of Lebanon in 1982, which was openly described. Here in the West, there's mythology about how they had to defend the Galilee from PLO attacks, which is total fabrication. But the only conflicts at the northern border were Israel attacking Lebanon in an effort to elicit some kind of PLO response. But it was clearly described in Israel as an effort to undercut the threatening PLO diplomatic offers, which threatened Israeli control of the West Bank. And so it would be consistent, and I think it's part of the reason. But I think there's a simpler reason. Israel, with U.S. backing, is moving systematically to take over what it wants in the West Bank. That means, it's been outlined. It's what Olmert called his convergence program, since expanded. It's basically Sharon's plan to take over the Jordan Valley, anything inside the separation wall, which is actually an annexation wall, with salients cutting across the territory to break it up into cantons and, arbitrarily distributed checkpoints, hundreds of them, to make life unlivable and to control the population. And they're systematically proceeding to do that with U.S. support. Well, they would love to do it without any resistance, of course. Now, in the West Bank, they've succeeded by violence to crush virtually any resistance, but they haven't succeeded in crushing resistance in the other half of Palestine, namely Gaza. So you want to crush that resistance too, and it's natural that the U.S. would support them. This is described in the West as legitimate self-defense. So when John Kerry was the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, was in Gaza yesterday, he lectured the Gazans on how they must get their leaders to understand that no country would tolerate rockets being fired, so therefore Israel's reaction was legitimate, maybe disproportionate, but legitimate self-defense. He certainly knows that that's not true, and everyone else who says it, if they think for a minute, knows that it's not true, and they don't believe the principle. When Russia attacked Chechnya and half-destroyed it, they claimed that it was legitimate self-defense against Chechen terror, which was very severe, much worse than anything the Palestinians do. But nobody accepted that for good reasons, because they had alternatives, namely peaceful alternatives. Stop carrying out the crimes in Chechnya. And Israel also has peaceful alternatives. Stop carrying out the crimes in the occupied territories. Or even narrower than that, just accept the ceasefire for the first time, every one they disrupted. So when there are peaceful alternatives, there is no legitimate right of self-defense by force. So that doesn't exist. And in the West, the issue can barely be discussed, although it's quite obvious. And I think that's the primary reason for the attack on Gaza. Try to stop any form of resistance to the systematic takeover of whatever Israel wants in the occupied territories with U.S. backing.